All
We
righty.
can catch up.
Okay,
Yeah,
we have
definitely.
a good amount of people coming in. So, hello everyone. Thank you for coming to Startup 101 today. We just have a couple house rules, so this is webinar style. If you guys have some questions, you can send it into the chat, but keep in mind that our speakers today will be answering questions at the end. And so we will just kind of keep the show going as to minimize as many disruptions as possible. So with that being said, thank you guys for joining. I hope you learned a lot today. And I will let Scott and Shomit take it away.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to let Showman introduce himself first because he's our VIP guest, and then I'll introduce myself when I start my presentation. Go ahead, Showman.
Scott's definitely the VIP. With that said, hi everybody. I'm Shomit Ghosh. I work with Roosevelt Ochoa's team together with Scott in the Office of Technology Partnerships here at UCR. My day job, I've been a VC in Silicon Valley for over 20 years, investing in early stage companies. Prior to that, I was a software entrepreneur for about 20 years and was part of multiple exits. So I bring the background of both former entrepreneur and current VC and current team member at UCR.
Nice. And I'm Scott Borowski, and I am also a serial entrepreneur. I'm on my sixth startup right now. And in addition to that, I'm what's called an EIR, or an entrepreneur in residence, at UC Riverside, and I help startups raise capital. We'll get to it in the slides, but I'll get into more detail on that. But I guess I will share my slides here, and we'll get going here. So let me share screen. Got our fancy background there. All right, cool. So, yeah, thanks y'all for coming. I don't know everyone on, of course, who's registered, but I think it's a great combination from what it looks like of both professors, grad students, postdocs, maybe even some undergrads, which is totally cool. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through spinning out a startup out of either your university, or if maybe you were a professor or you were a postdoc or a grad student, now you want to do a startup. So we're going to basically talk about how you raise money for that endeavor. And let me get going here. So I think everyone probably knows this. I don't think it's, unknown to most people on this webinar, but there's three main ways that a startup is going to raise capital, especially if you're what's called a deep tech startup. And so that could be something in the life science verticals, that could be climate tech, it could be ag tech, it could be B2B AI. But generally, with a deep tech startup, you may actually use all three of these. But so funding through growth and revenue, we'll talk about just very quickly, because this webinar is designed to talk about what's called equity financing or equity capital. And that's venture capital. Obviously, there's equity crowdfunding. We're not going to really talk about that today, but it is an option. And there's also corporate venture capital, which we'll touch on. There's also non-dilutive funding. I'm sure most of you who are professors and grad students and postdocs are aware of what that is. That's getting SBIR, STTR funding for your startup. And that is something that we have an entire other team of mentor/EIRs here at UCR that can help you with that. But today we're focusing on equity capital. So, so funding through growth, well, I think everyone probably knows what that means, but you don't have a huge amount of examples of very, very large companies that have gone public that have done this, at least not to my knowledge. One that did, you may be familiar with, a company called MailChimp. They grew through organic growth. I believe they went public. I'm not sure if they're still public. They might have been acquired. I haven't kept up with them. This is a little bit older image here. But the point is that it is possible to scale to a very large and publicly traded company without raising equity capital or venture capital. So that's want to throw that out there. It's also something that a lot of the AI startups founders that I talk to are scaling organically and not relying on venture capital to grow their businesses. Now, there's obviously a number of startups, we're going to get into that in a second, that's not a fit for. If you're a life science startup and you need FDA approval, obviously you're not going to be able to bootstrap your way to FDA approval if you have to raise 50 or $60 million like we're doing for my startup ASC Bio to get through clinical trials. So it's VC is not for everybody, but we're going to talk about VC for those that want to go after it. Non-dilutive funding, I just talked about that for a second. You can reach out to our team if you want to know more about that or need help. But we're going to focus today on the VC game. And so what is going on with VC? Well, this year has been a little bit, 2024 and also 2023 were a little bit of a challenge, a little bit of struggle. What you have is you have different stages of kind of investors you're going to be talking to when you're a startup. And so you've probably all heard of friends and family or friends, family, and fools money. What we're talking about today is what's called either pre-seed, seed, or Series A capital. And when you're just spinning out of a lab or just starting a startup, once you've hit enough milestones and de-risked the deal enough, you're going to go out for what is either a pre-seed or a seed round with investors. And one of the things that happened, which has made 2024 a little bit more challenging of a fundraising environment, is back in 2020 and 21, there were a lot more VCs that had raised funds that were able to deploy their capital in early stage or pre-seed seed deals. A lot of those VCs have not been able to raise another fund. And so there are many VCs that are no longer writing checks, which makes it harder for startups to raise capital in some cases. The other thing that has happened to some of the startups that we mentor is that the sector that you're in needs to be hot because, and no offense to Shomik, because he's a VC, but a lot of times VCs will tend to pile into one hot sector. And so I think you can probably all guess what the sector was this year. It was AI, and it is AI. So if you are doing something like an ag tech startup, for in this example, you can see what happened here in 2020 all the way even through 2022. And I got to get the current data for 24. Couldn't find it, but it's there somewhere. But the point is that the ag tech sector had gotten pretty much devastated to the point where there weren't that many deals being done. I'm not saying that if you are an ag tech founder coming out of the university, you can't raise money. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying it helps to be in a hot sector. The other thing to think about is there was a previous kind of mantra, and especially if you're in a software business, which was growth at all costs, who cares about profitability, et cetera, et cetera. That also changed in 2023 and 2024. A lot of early stage investors, they want to see what's called traction, which we'll talk about a little bit more. They want to see traction. They want to see if you're able to have sales, if you're not in a life science business and you can get to early sales, they want to see actual customers buying and or interested in your product. So just keep that in mind if you do plan to go out to raise capital, that in almost every vertical, you're going to be expected to have some type of customer traction. And we'll talk more about that. Also, since we've had a bunch more people join, just if you have any questions, is the chat working for non-panelists, Eileen? So chat's working? Okay, good.
We have Q&A. You guys can submit your questions on there. And if you
on Q&A? Okay. Yeah. So sorry for the people that just joined, throw your questions in Q&A and then we'll get to as many as we can after we go through these. So knowing then there's a lot of words on this slide, but the basic thing is you need to know your potential investors, just like you need to know your customer. And so what you'll need to figure out is a number of things. If you decide to go out to raise venture money or angel money, you obviously don't want to spend a bunch of time networking in through LinkedIn or through, friends and family or through your board of advisors, or maybe through a mentor like Shomit or me who works with startups. You don't want to spend a bunch of time trying to network into a investor who has no interest in what you're doing. And that happens all the time. I literally every week I have founders and entrepreneurs emailing me, texting me saying, hey, I see that on LinkedIn, you know this person, and maybe it's a climate tech fund, and they are doing a B2B SaaS company and they want me to introduce me. And it's like, okay, so as you can probably imagine, you don't want to waste the time to try to network into a VC that's not interested in your vertical. So that's one thing. So that's sector. The other thing you need to think about, as we talked about a minute ago, is stage. And so once again, if you do your research, and those 4 logos to the right are places you can do research. PitchBook's a little expensive. I wouldn't recommend it as a startup, but I did put it up there because some people have access to PitchBook. I do as part of the UCR program. But you can get a pretty affordable Crunchbase monthly membership that you can then cancel once you've raised your money. You can also use a place called Signal. which is from a VC called NFX, and they have, I think that last I checked, thousands of investors on that database. And then, of course, AngelList is another place to go for earlier stage capital. So stage just basically means what we talked about a minute ago, which is pre-seed, seed, or Series A. Pre-seed can also be called your angel round. These terms are somewhat interchangeable. The sector we just talked about, you want to make sure that the investor you're trying to network into is interested in your vertical or your sector. And you definitely want to make sure that they have money to invest. So there are a number of VCs that have what's called deployed their fund, and they either are raising another fund or maybe they've decided to retire because they're very wealthy. But in any case, if they don't have what's called dry powder, even if you get the introduction and they love you and they love your company, they're not going to be able to invest because they don't have the ability to write checks. So that's another thing to look for, is called dry powder. And that's something, again, that you can cobble together from PitchBook, Crunchbase, et cetera. Those sources will list how much money that the funds, the VC funds especially, have still to invest. It's not always 100% accurate, but it's pretty close. The other thing to think about is, what do you want to do to get into the investor in terms of what level do you go in at? What I would say is, of course, what's called the GP or general partner, it would of course be the best to go in at the highest level you could in the fund. Many times though, especially if you're a first time founder, or if you haven't built a board of advisors or a board of a connected board, or if maybe you didn't go to a school like Stanford or MIT, where you get a lot of connections from going to that school, then I would just personally, if you can't get into the GP, I would get into any member on their team if you can get a warm intro. I mean, again, that's not ideal, but I would think about that. So basically, figure out a way to get a warm intro to someone in that venture capital group. Hopefully it's the GP or the general partner. It could be one of the more junior people on the team. It could be an analyst. It could be an associate. And there's like literally dozens of different, if you go look on Crunchbase or whatever, now they've got principals and investors. And different firms do titling different ways, but in general, the GPs, as Shomit will tell you, they make the decision at the end of the day who gets the checks and who doesn't. Just quickly, we could do literally an entire whole hour on corporate strategics, but we're not going to today. But just to mention, there are pros and cons to what are called corporate strategics or CVCs. That's basically large companies like, well, I mean, any of the Fortune 500 pretty much. And I won't call it any names because we work with a lot of them, but in some cases it can be great to build those relationships. In other cases, it can be a huge waste of time. And so again, what I would do is, work with a mentor who has done a lot of work with with CVCs. I have, Showman has, other members of our team have, or maybe your own board of advisors or friends and family have. But just be careful with that. It can be a good avenue to explore, but it also can be, like I said, a complete waste of time. The other thing to think about is, you got to also think about, like, when you're sending someone your pitch deck, which we'll talk about in a minute, when you're sending someone your pitch deck, they may have seen, I don't know. I know VCs that run like in our network, who run multi-billion-dollar funds. They're seeing $3,000 to 4,000 deals a month. Now that could be an exaggeration because they're just maybe, trying to be puffed up and bigger than, but the point is they're seeing a lot of deals. And so, you really want to do the work on the page we talked about before to make sure that you're not wasting your time or their time. And, again, we could do an entire session on just this slide, but we won't today. We already talked about a warm introduction. It's absolutely critical that you get a warm introduction. Many VCs, don't even look at cold intros or cold emails. Some will. So again, do your research. The other thing that happens a lot, and especially it's happened in 2024, is that, and I'm helping 9 startups raise capital right now, and that's across climate tech, life science, B2B, AI, et cetera, all different verticals. So it's not just one vertical. And, we have our targeted list, and they'll have a meeting with the VC, and the VC will say, love you, love the product, love the team, keep in touch. Okay. That's a no. Anything that's not a term sheet, and the Showman's going to talk about term sheets in just a minute. Anything that's not a term sheet is a no from a VC. Now, I'm not saying that you don't stay in touch with them. I'm not saying you don't add them to your investor database and update them with your hopefully monthly updates that you're doing as a startup. But just keep that in mind that it's basically a no if they're not sending you a term sheet. So um, let's talk about pitch decks for a few minutes. The main thing about a pitch deck is that all it really is a calling card or whatever you want to call it. You're just trying to get the first meeting with the investor. Okay. So again, that could be an angel investor. It could be a corporate investor. It could be a venture capitalist. It even could be a family office, which is just a kind of a typically a larger version of an angel, someone who has a family situation, or they potentially have the money to hire their own staff. That's called a family office. I forgot to mention that a minute ago. But anyway, you're going to send the pitch deck out to this whatever group of investors you identified, and these are the things they want to see in it. Again, we could literally do hours on just this pitch deck slide. We're just going to cover a couple of the basics really fast. And so these are the main points you want to get across in your pitch deck. Obviously, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Pitch Deck 101 webinars, free online resources from accelerators like Y Combinator or Techstars. Many of the VCs will have what we want to see in a pitch deck on their websites or in their blogs or on Substack, wherever they're writing, or on X Twitter. So again, just make sure you're sending the pitch deck that the investors you've targeted want to see. One thing that happens with pitch decks a lot of times with technical founders and current or former professors or grad students or postdocs is they will send us a deck. I'll say, is the deck ready? And they'll say yes, and they'll send it to me, and it's 45 slides long. So, and I think Showman will back me up here. You probably don't want to send a 45 slide technical deck to an investor as your first deck. It's probably not going to be received well or even read. So we want to just keep it simple. You will, and Showman will talk about this also in a minute, when you get into diligence with an investor, you will be going through all of those 45 slides. But for now, let's just focus on some basic stuff. So we'll quickly go through the basic stuff, and then I'm going to hand it over to Showman. So here's the basic stuff. What are investors looking for? One thing that couple of gotchas that we see a lot of times from our academic founders and entrepreneurs is that they are, of course, excited about their invention or their technology, or they wouldn't have been doing it for maybe their whole career or whatever it is. But it doesn't mean it's a large enough market, number one. And then number two, a lot of times what we find is you need to think, and again, this doesn't apply to every vertical, but it's just the same basic thought experiment. You need to think about feature versus product versus platform. Okay, so most investors are not going to, well, I can probably say all investors that I know anyway, no one's going to fund a feature. And so if you're just a piece of a larger solution, there are other things you can do. We've got most universities, UCR, Brian Suh and his team, there's definitely the ability for many professors and others to license their technology to an existing larger startup or corporation. So if you're a feature, think about licensing, think about other pathways, but I wouldn't recommend trying to raise VC because it's probably not going to be a good use of time. Same thing with a product in many ways. Products sometimes get funded, but really what you want to do is think of it as a platform. And I know that word is like buzzword and it's overused and it's like, doesn't really mean anything because people use it so much. And a lot of times people will say they're a platform when they're a feature. But the point is you can work with our EIR, our mentor team, to help you kind of figure out where you are in that continuum. The reason why I bring this up is because, and again, we don't have time to get into it today, but like the 101 of VCs is they are looking for the 100x outcome for the money they put in. And the reason is because usually in a fund, let's just say that they're a smaller fund and they invest in 20 startups in a year or 2 years or the life of their fund, they have to have at least one or two, if not three of those be what's called a home run or 100x return. So that's the typical who's who of Silicon Valley that you've all heard of that have gone public after being a startup. And then that returns money to the VC, and then the VC returns money to their investors, which are called LPs or limited partners. So just make sure that we think a lot about this to make sure you're even an investable startup before you spend a lot of time on this. What are investors looking for? Obviously, at the early stage, team is absolutely critical. If you're a solo founder, nothing wrong with that, but going to be probably challenging, if not impossible, to raise venture money as a solo founder. So put a lot of work into building your team of co-founders so that you can go out and you can raise money. This is an example of what the early well, it says oh, it's not PayPal. Sorry, that's Square. That's the Square founding team. Square's a large startup that I don't even know what they're worth now. I think they're 50 billion or something. You'll hear that your mentors, your advisors, and you probably yourselves have heard a lot about traction. What does it mean? Well, again, we could literally do multiple hours on this based on what vertical you're in, but traction is different things. This is an example of just a B2B SaaS company, which again is probably a little bit easier to get traction in than a life science startup, for example. But traction just means that you have customer interest, you have actual sales, you have good, what are called metrics or KPIs, key performance indicators that the investor wants to see, or you have gone through a number of SBIRs and you have a number of grants that are non-dilutive funding that have gotten you to hit enough milestones. If you're like, say, a climate tech startup or an ag tech startup or a life science startup, that then the investor is more interested in talking to you than if you're just, hey, I just came out of the lab and I have this idea. Like, that's typically not a fundable startup. The other thing I hear every week, I don't know how many founders I talk to every week, entrepreneurs, probably 20 or more. I hear this every week, literally. Oh, well, we're so awesome. We're so amazing. We don't have any competition. Okay. Every startup has competition. And so this is just an example of if someone was doing a LinkedIn back in the day, before LinkedIn obviously was what it is, look at all the competition they found. Every vertical has this. I've had so many founders say, I have no competition in 5 minutes of using a chatbot like Claude or GPT. I can find competition. And if you're the founder or the entrepreneur and you don't know your competition inside and out and cold and know who they are, then you're not ready to raise capital. So to please take your competition seriously, make sure you know it inside and out, and make sure you put it in your pitch deck. The next one is, and this is a big one. And again, these aren't necessarily in order. I'm just kind of giving you just some things to think about as you build your pitch deck. How does your business make money? You would be amazed at the amount of pitch decks that we see. And I'm sure Shomit can probably, since he is a VC, he can probably tell you there are quite a few pitch decks that come across all of our desks that have, you get through the pitch deck and you just don't even understand how the startup makes money. Please don't do that, because you're potentially burning a really good connection to an investor, and they may or may not even they're not going to come try to tease it out of you. They're not going to say, well, let me take some time out of my busy day to go and work with this founder to figure out what their business model is and how they make money. Your board of advisors can do that. Your mentors can do that. You and your team can do that, but the investors not going to. So please make sure that you figured out what your money, how you're making money, what's called your GTM or your go-to-market strategy. Again, we could go on and on about this, but I want to hand it off to Showman in a minute. So another thing that's important for your pitch deck is some type of financial model. There are many ways to do a financial model. There's top down, bottoms up, blah, blah, blah. What you basically want to do is, if you're going out to venture capitalists especially, you need to convince them that you are a large enough idea / startup with traction that they want to fund you. And so as you can see from this example, I guess that's Square again. I didn't know I had that in twice, but in any case, you can see that they're basically saying that they're a highly profitable, large business over just a few years. I know it's B2B software, so it's a little different again than deep tech, but the point still remains. You need to have a financial model in your pitch deck, a simplified one, not an eye chart, obviously. But anyway, so financial model, please don't forget that in your pitch deck. The other thing a lot of startups forget to do is actually ask for the money. So, you definitely want to ask for the money as one of the last slides in your pitch deck. This is an example from Uber when they were called Uber Cab way back in the day. And what you want to do is you want to have what's called milestone-based financing, some type of show in a way. Please don't put the um, circle with 20% marketing, 40% whatever development. Don't use the lame pie chart, please. You need to actually put on that slide, what are you going to use? What milestones will you hit when this investor or multiple investors writes you the check? So that's a big deal. The other thing that, Showman, are you covering safe convertible note priced around in your talk or not?
Just quickly, we'll talk about things, but go ahead and talk about what you want there, Scott.
Okay, yeah, I'll just say quickly, and we'll let Showman go into more detail. But basically, there's three ways to raise capital as a startup. Um, a lot of startups will, and I recommend they go out with a post money safe first. A lot of investors don't do post money safes, especially early stage. You need to know if your investor comes back and says, "Oh, we only do priced rounds of convertible notes." You'll basically need to make the determination: do we want to do that or not? A convertible note is a debt instrument, different than a safe. A priced rounds means you're actually pricing, you're putting a share price on your company, and that's where a lot of times that will happen at what's called the Series A. Sometimes it happens before. Actually, we just got a term sheet for a startup that's raising a seed round, and the investor, the current, you know, their main investor lead they have is insisting that they have a priced round at the seed stage. Now that's not what is ideal for startups, but again, in this economic climate and with this fundraising climate, you just have to, as founders, weigh your options. And if someone comes back and says we'll only do a priced round, only you as the founders can make that decision with your families, et cetera. So that's that one, and that's it. So I'll hand it over to Shomit so he can go through his, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So thanks, everybody.
Okay, so I'm going to share. Share my screen. And while we're doing that, I mean, am I able to share? Doesn't look like it.
Eileen, he should be able to share, correct?
You're muted.
You should be able to share.
It's not allowing me to share. Tell you what, Eileen, do you have my slides there?
Yes, I do.
If you can pull those up, and while you're pulling those up, and I can just have you advance the slides as we talk, Eileen. So if you pull those up, so basically what Scott said is absolutely the correct thing here. What you want to do is to get in with the VCs to the point, advance them through the discussion that they actually want to give you a term sheet. But before they give you a term sheet, they're going to get into due diligence. And the due diligence, you can plan on that being multiple meetings extending over the course of a few to several weeks. What they're digging into is what can you defend yourself with on the business side, on the technology side, and the people side. So due diligence will be in those three areas. The business side, it's basically, can we confirm that the customer has an economic benefit from your product? And we'll determine that both by talking to customers you already have and also talking to customers who are prospective. So we'll actually call customers that we know and say, hey, Scott says that he can deliver value XYZ. Would that be of value to you? So that's the business due diligence that's done. It's really confirming the economic value that will accrue to the customer. The technology due diligence is the product buildable in a finite time frame? And importantly, is it defensible from the inevitable competition that will come? So that's what we try and determine next is the technology tractable, and once built, is there a barrier that can keep the competition at bay? Finally, people diligence. Part of this is what's your professional background for doing this deal? And for that, we'll talk to your references. In addition, what's going to be going on is what's your personal diligence? Is this someone I can work with for the next 6 to 10 years? And I'm going to gauge that basically in my interactions with you. So people diligence is both the formal, let me call your references. It's also the informal. How easy was it for me to interact with you in all of our discussions? The issue that will come up as the diligence concludes is what should the valuation of the company be? It's not like Shark Tank. You don't get to set the price. It's a buyer's market. The buyer, the investor gets to set the price. So be prepared to have that be a collaborative discussion. And with a good investor, the two of you can sit down and figure out what makes sense with the investor, what makes sense for you, and jointly arrive at a value that makes sense. To be able to do this in an informed way, you must also already know what similar deals such as yours, what have they been valued at? So it's good to know, as I'm trying to get my company funded, to say, oh, Scott at Brovsky.com who's at a similar stage of deal, and he had a pre-money valuation of $10 million. It sets a little ballpark that both we and the investors can work from. So have an understanding of what valuations have already been done for existing deals, just to inform your current deal. So with that, let's talk about closing the deal. This is the final step in equity financing. So if we go to the next slide. Closing the deal. How do you know that your fundraising efforts have been successful? The investor gives you a signed term sheet. Just a blank term sheet ain't enough. It's got to be signed. That shows the commitment from the investor. If you've done a really good job of talking to VCs, you're going to be in the ideal position of getting multiple term sheets. This is the goal that we all aspire to, because if you get multiple term sheets, not only can you negotiate with the party that you want to close with, because you can say, hey, I'm getting some different terms from other VCs. Can you come up on this, come down on that, etc. But it also gives you the luxury of picking the person that you work with the best. So ideally, you get multiple term sheets. You can pick which one, pick both on the terms of the deal, and also pick on the personality of the people involved. You're going to be basically married to that person for the next anywhere from 6 to 10 years. You better get along with them. So this also means that don't necessarily go with the best terms, go with the best investor. You're way better off going with the quality investor and a quality partner within that venture fund than merely going with somebody who gave you the highest valuation and perhaps the most dollars on offer. Next slide. Legal representation. So, when the VC is looking at you, they know the space really well. They've been doing this for a long time. You're going to look like these individuals on the right-hand side, perhaps. So what this requires is actually having really good legal representation on your side from day one. Term sheets are really simple, 5 to 6 pages, very easy to digest. I've been doing the startup and VC thing for 40 plus years. I always get an attorney involved in term sheets. The reason for this is that the attorney can know a lot of things. I might only do 1 or 2 new financings a year. The startup attorney might be doing 50 new financings a year. So they're really well attuned to what current market conditions are. So I can ask the attorney, hey, does this look like a market condition here, what we're asking for, or what the entrepreneur is asking for? And the attorney can say, yeah, we see that a lot nowadays. That's a completely fair ask. So it's a really good way to understand current market conditions. Also, attorneys are really good at sniffing out minefields that may exist in the term sheet. Sometimes these minefields can be a little bit subtle. And there's a portion of the term sheet known as the protective provisions that might have some landmines hidden within it. Good attorneys are really good at discovering those. All of us may be less good. So from day one, advice is get a good startup attorney, not necessarily just any attorney, but a good startup attorney, somebody who does this day in, day out, week in, week out for the course of the year, working with companies just such as yours. Next slide. So what's in a term sheet? It's actually a very straightforward document. The things that your eyes will initially go to is the valuation. This is the ascribed value to your company coming in. What is your pre-money valuation before any money is given? The more value, the more validations you bring in, as Scott talked about, the higher your valuation goes. So you'll see your valuation. You'll also see the amount raised. The valuation plus the amount raised yields the post-money valuation. So if you have an ascribed value of $10 million based on your company and your product and your customers, and you raise $5 million, your post money is $15 million. There will be an equity split. That's also talked about here. This is how much is investor A taking, how much is investor B taking, and these will all be in preferred shares. In addition, how many shares are allocated to the company's founders and common shares. There's also a set of shares that are set aside in something known as the pool. The pool is this number of shares that are set aside for new employees you might be hiring. So again, depending on the nature of your company, what you're bringing in with valuations, Either the investors have more equity or less equity, you have more equity or less equity. If your team is a little bit incomplete, your pool may be larger. If your team is pretty complete, your pool will be smaller, etc. Lots of terms that you'll see within the term sheet beyond just valuation and equity, things like protective provisions and voting and drag along arrangements. These basically have to do with how the company gets governed. These are very crucial. So, at first you might, your eyes might go to the valuation, the amount raised. After that, seek out the protective provisions, the voting and drag along agreements, because this will get into the governance of your company once it's been financed. Liquidation preferences at early stages, you won't have this. At later stages, starting as early perhaps with Series B, you may start to see things like liquidation preferences. If your deal is hard to finance, you may be forced to throw in sweeteners like liquidation preferences. A sweetener might be on an exit, like an acquisition. Mr. or Ms. Investor, you get 2x your money back before anyone else sees any money. And this sweetens the deal for deals that may be hard to finance. But you will see things like liquidation preferences. What does the board look like? Who gets represented on the board? Founders, new investors, etc. Also in the term sheet is exclusivity and no shop. If I give you a term sheet, what I'm saying is that, Scott, please work with me. I want to finance your company. But once you sign, you can't shop this deal around to other people. So this is an agreement that we will work together to try and get this deal done. And while we're working on that, please don't shop this around to other parties. Diligence items, it might be that through the diligence process, we didn't finish all the diligence items. There's still a few things we needed to run down. So here's a term sheet, but here's a list of 2 or 3 things that we still need to do prior to closing this deal. Finally, the closing date. Closing date might be 45 days or so, something like that. It shouldn't be too long because bear in mind this exclusivity and no shop. I'm basically taking myself off the market. So I don't want that closing date to be too far away, because just in case the deal doesn't close, again, I don't want to be locked up in an exclusivity and no shop for too long. Next page. Classes of stock, all kinds of classes of stock, but the ones that we care about here in venture financing is preferred and common. Preferred shares is what the investors get, and they're so named because they get preferred terms on it. One of the preferred terms might be, for example, you might get a liquidation preference. You get 2x or 3x or whatever back on your money on an acquisition. So you get your money out first as a multiple, not just your invested dollars. So that might be a preferred term. Something else that you might see is that preferred shares have a separate voting agreement. And because they get to vote separately, they might actually exercise a good deal of control over the company. So those are the preferred shares. Employees get common shares. When the company goes public, all shares get converted to common, so everybody gets paid equally. But the truth is that over 90% of the exits are via acquisition, meaning your company gets acquired by somebody. And on an acquisition, we start to look at the difference between preferred and common. Preferred gets the preferential treatment, they get paid out first. Common get paid out second with whatever proceeds remain. So this is the thing, preferred and common. You as a founder, employee will have the common. It will get treated differently. If you get to an IPO, wonderful, everyone gets paid equally. The likely result is you get exited by an acquisition, bear in mind that you will be treated as a second class of shares with the preferred getting preferred treatment. Next slide. Cap table. So the cap table is the very simple spreadsheet that describes how your company ownership is split up. So it's a spreadsheet, who owns how much of the company. You can see investors, employees there, the different classes of shares, preferred, common, the different rounds of financing. At the outset, your cap table is very simple. As you go forward, it may get a little bit more complex as more investors are added and things like preferred terms, et cetera, are applied. But it's a simple thing. Just imagine a very simple spreadsheet that shows how the stock is divided up across the employees and the investors. Simpler, the better, because if you have lots and lots of investors or lots of people sharing in the cap table, that might complicate the governance of the company. And it's for this reason that you'll see something known as the drag along in a term sheet that's meant to take all the dogs and cats, all the minor investors, and kind of herd them together so that they don't complicate the decision making and the governance of the company. So cap table is something that an investor will want to see at the outset because they want to see how the ownership of the company is split up, by whom and how much, etc. Next slide. Intellectual property. Defensibility is really key to your business because you find a big market and you find a way to monetize that big market through a cool business model. Other people will be looking over your shoulder thinking, oh, we could do that too. So you need to be able to keep people out from competing with you, including your partners. So how do you establish that? IP. IP is crucial for anything that's a physical device. For software, it's less of an issue. I think for the simple reason because no matter what you do in software, there's another way of doing it, which yields an equivalent result. So think about the business that you're in, the technology foundation that you have, particularly if it has any kind of a hardware manifestation. Think about securing IP to be able to help you to be able to protect your business. So again, it's very much dependent on the business that you're in. Less important for software startups, more important for everything outside of software. But even within software, there is an important component of it. Not so crucial, however, in the software space. Next slide. So when do you know you're done? So you get a term sheet, you sign it, you go through any remaining diligence items. The attorneys launch into closing the deal, and this requires putting together about a half dozen different documents and getting them all signed. All of these have to do with how your company is constituted, how it's governed, et cetera. Getting all those documents done, that takes a few weeks. When all that is done, everybody signs off, investors, founders, et cetera. That gets filed with your state secretary of state, whichever state you're incorporated in, and the money shows up in the bank. Until the money shows up in the bank and everything's been filed with the state of incorporation, you're not done. Things can still go awry. So keep your paranoia up and work towards this goal, which is getting everything signed off, filed with the state, and having the money arrive in your bank. And once you've done that, you're done. And away you go, not just to prosecute your business, but to already to start to be thinking about how you raise your next round of financing. I think that's the last slide.
Cool. So let's take some questions. We've got 15 minutes left, so we'll if you didn't know, you can put questions in the Q&A. So the first one we'll have let's let Shomit and I could both talk to this one. We'll let Shomit do it though. Someone asked, what are the characteristics of a bad VC?
Oh, that's a good question. So a good way to find out whether somebody is a good or bad VC is to talk to people who've done business with that firm and with the individual in question. Something else that you should also give credence to is, what does your gut feel when you spend time with that person? Because it's literally like being married to them for the next 6 to 10 years. So if they are rubbing you the wrong way, take that under caution. Of course, the reality is that you may only get one term sheet, in which case, if you want to get your company to move forward, you may have to gulp hard and take the term sheet and sign with that VC. Ideally, you get multiple term sheets, multiple VCs, pick the one with whom you have the most comfort. So that's basically it. I think also, too, that startups are very high stress and high risk. It really helps to have a VC who's done the same job themselves so that they can speak as a voice of experience. So experience counts for a lot. So that, too, might be a selection criterion, is that when you're talking to VCs, who is it that's bringing experience as a startup entrepreneur into the equation to be able to help you succeed?
Cool. The next question, I'll take this one, then Shomit, please weigh in. Is, do VCs like to invest in startups from universities? So that's a mixed bag. It oftentimes there is some snobbery in the VC world. If you are, again, bringing your startup out of MIT or Stanford or one of the top schools in the world, it's going to be easier to get meetings than if you're not. But it really is a mixed bag. I've had VCs. I was just on a call, a Zoom call 2 weeks ago with a $2.5 billion life science VC who basically said, we have zero interest in hearing about any deals from any university. I was like, okay, then. So I'm not sure why they took the call, but anyway. So what I would say is, yes, VCs will invest in startups. I and the team here at UCR, we've spun, I think we're up to 8 or 9. I have to look at my notes, but anyway, 9 startups out of our labs and help them get funding. And Shomit, anything to add to that?
Nope, I think that's well said. There's a really famous university spin out venture funded company that all of you are familiar with, Google, right? So there are many cases of university spin outs that have been wild successes in the entrepreneurial landscape. I think getting back to I think the core of the question, what investors are wary of is individuals who think that the technology is the thing. It's not the technology, it's the business model. And so if we fall into the trap of being so wedded to our technology, Scott, this is the greatest thing ever. Why don't you like it? And, I'm developing feature XYZ on the technology. That's the wrong thing. Startups are businesses. So unfortunately, a lot of academic folks fall into the trap of thinking it's the technology. It's not. The technology is there in service of the business model. So if you can grasp that and internalize that and realize it's about the business model and just be relentless in pursuit of the business model and the technology is there only in support, then you'll have better success with a VC.
Cool. Okay, next question. This one, literally, we could spend 20 minutes on, but we've only got 10 left. So when seeking an investment, this is from Jay, how to determine which type of investor to reach out to initially. So basically, I talk to founders about this literally every day. I've actually talked to 2 this morning already about this. The thing is that especially if you're a first-time founder, you may not know. And so again, I would go through the resources that we talked about, do your homework, use AI, whatever you need to do. But in general, what you'll find is there are certain metrics that a investor wants to see before they will look at your startup in each vertical at each stage. So for example, like you may get no interest from any, and I can tell you this right now, for unless you're an AI startup, most B2B SaaS, which is software as a service startups, they're typically not getting interest from investors now, they have in the past, at the what would be called the seed round, if they don't have a substantial amount of revenue, and not just revenue, but month over month growth as in terms of percentage. So again, each verticals will be different. If you're life science, maybe it's you're about to go to clinical trials. Maybe it's you de-risked the deal with these 4 different studies that were funded by NIH or NSF or whatever grants. So that is I mean, literally this is a case by case is what I'm saying. And since I don't know all the founders and entrepreneurs that are on the call and what verticals you're in, anything to add to that, Shomit?
Nope, exactly as you said, Scott. It's case by case, and every investor looks for a different set of validations before they write a check. So what validations are you bringing, and who does that match with as far as investment criteria? So that's how you want to approach it. So every case is different. Think about the validation that you have. Think about how that maps to the investors who you need.
Okay, so another question. I'll just do this one quickly. What are the sources for finding a reputable startup attorney? Um, I recommend startup attorneys all the time. Showmit does, the rest of our entrepreneur residence team does. I would just go to someone who is interested in your success, a mentor, an advisor of another startup founder, friend of yours. But yes, please, I have so many startups, especially from first-time founders who had a friend who was an attorney, and that could be, someone like Shomit said, you want a startup attorney, not someone who is practicing family law or whatever. So yeah, just get in touch with us and or anyone else in your network who you trust, and they will recommend that to you.
Yeah, I'll put a finer point on that, if I may, Scott.
Yeah.
And startups are different than big corporations. So it might be that your sister graduated top of class from Harvard and is a corporate attorney in Manhattan for, big companies. That's not a startup. So you want somebody who lives and breathes startups because that's a very different kettle of fish than, major corporate law back in Manhattan.
Here's one that again we could spend a ton of time on. This is a really complicated answer, so I'm not going to give you a full one. But the question is, should all founders get the same number of shares? You want to start with that one, Shomit?
That's entirely up to you, right? So you and your fellow team members know who's adding value in which way. And in fact, we as investors will not dictate. So, Scott and Francis and Eileen come and say, "Hey, we have a startup, and how should we split up our shares?" I would say, "I don't care. You guys figure it out." And the three of you need to believe that it's an equitable split of shares. It's not for me to dictate. I may think that, Eileen's the brains of the outfit. But Scott and Francis think otherwise, and Scott thinks it's Francis, whatever. And this is how the shares will get allocated. So it's entirely up to the team. Come with that answer already in mind, because the investor is going to be unimpressed if you don't know that already.
Yeah, and I just add quickly, I see a lot of what would be called I mean, I don't know what well, there's a lot of terms for it, but basically a distressed or a challenging capitalization table. And a lot of and especially for early stage before you go out to raise money, equity is the most precious thing you have as a startup by far. And so what I see a lot of times is a startup will come to us to have us help them raise capital, and their cap table will be a complete mess. They'll have given like 5% equity to six different advisors or something like that, not knowing that that's just, you don't do that, right? And so you just want to make sure that you're very, very, very careful how you divvy out your equity. The other thing that happens a lot, especially with university startups, is you'll have a person working as a founder on the team, and then they'll go get a high paying job at Google or Amazon or Apple. That happens all the time. And or others, not just those, but you know what I mean. So anyway, just be super, super careful about your equity, how you give it out, how people earn it, et cetera, et cetera. And again, we could go into a seriously detailed conversation about that, but we don't have time. So the next one is from Brian. Should faculty co-founders be the ones pitching to investors? If not, why not? You want to start, Shomit?
If you're invested in this project being successful, pitch the deal. You have to be completely invested in the success of the company and the product. I think it's less effective if you have someone who's an outsider coming in and pitching the deal. If you're the brains of the outfit and that you came up with the technology, that's the breakthrough, and you're completely invested in making the company successful, pitch the deal, because that passion and that knowledge will really sell well with the investor.
Definitely. Someone asked, what is a post-money safe? You can look that up online. We won't take time on that. Um, here's from Venkat. How should you just start up decide if you should go for grant funding or venture funding? Again, a very complicated question depending on the vertical. What I would say to that is, talk to your advisors, your internal team. Again, we have an entire team of mentors that does nothing other than help startups get non-dilutive funding. But really, like, it depends on the vertical. It depends on what you're trying to achieve, what milestones you're trying to hit. In many cases, VCs will not look at early stage deep tech deals unless you have already gotten, let's just call it whatever. I won't say a number because it doesn't matter, but let's just say millions of dollars of non-dilutive funding to de-risk the deal to the point where the VCs are interested in looking at it. So I've got a great idea. I'm spending it out of my lab as a professor, grad student, postdoc. Typically is not a VC fundable situation. But Shomit, anything to add on that?
Nope. VCs will bring a different discipline to what it is that you're doing. VCs are focused on, are you achieving your business milestones? And they will be relentless in asking about that and driving you towards that. So, if that's the next thing you need to do, great, because they will bring that discipline to you. VCs also bring a bunch of other things, operating experience. How do I hire? How do I price? How do I grow? How do I find partners, et cetera? And also they have all of those contacts too, including to your next rounds of investors. So VCs bring a lot more than just the money and shouldn't be viewed as merely a source of money.
Good point. Another question, what is the current investment environment for deep tech startups in the US? I'll just take that quickly because we're running out of time. Just look at the sources we talked about. PitchBook has a bunch of free reports on the deep tech verticals. Go look it up. I would say that it's challenging, but again, that's only representative of I've probably, I don't know how many startups I've talked to about fundraising this year, maybe 50. So obviously I have a very tiny view into that, but it is tough. There's a lot of wait and see. with the current new administration coming in, et cetera. So again, I won't get into the details, but look at the various reports, talk to other friends who are trying to raise money, who are founders. Anything else on deep tech climate, Shomit?
Nope, well said.
Okay. Okay, this is kind of a long question. We'll see if we can get it. So Mihalis asked, the typical disease of an academic-led startup: A, starts enthusiastically; B, realizes it's time-consuming and requires new skills; C, can't hire CXOs; D, fizzles out. Okay, that's fair because I've definitely had my share of mentoring those type of situations. How can we address B and C, which is time-consuming and hiring CXOs? Well, quickly, what we have done with the startups that we've helped bring out of the labs at UCR is we've helped the professor find two things. One is a CEO. In our case at UCR, we have not had a professor what's called go with the deal, which means they've left their tenured or their day job at the university. Other universities do have professors go with the deal, so this answer would obviously be different in that case. But in our case, we've had to find a CEO, and then typically what we do is we pull a postdoc or a grad student from his or her lab to basically be the technical lead until the startup raises some money and can start adding headcount or hiring talent. Shomit?
Yeah, I'll add to that is that none of us are the be all and end all. So we have things that we're good at, and there are things that we don't have background or skill in. Bring in those people as early as you can. And yeah, you will surrender some control, but that's the best way to achieve success. So if you're a technologist, Mikhail says, I know you are, your interest would be best served by bringing in those sales and marketing people and giving them, full run of the ship in those areas from the get-go.
Yeah, I mean, this simplifies it greatly, but literally every startup needs is two people to start and hopefully more, but two, you need a technical person and someone who can sell. And that's basically it. I can't tell you the number of startups that we're mentoring right now that are unbelievably talented technologists in whatever vertical they're in, but like they're not able to hit any business development milestones. And they also have not been able to recruit a selling co-founder to their team. And that just puts you in a situation where you're not able to raise capital. Because again, the VCs want the deal de-risked. They want to see traction. And in almost every vertical, if you don't have any sales or customer interest or pipeline, you're not going to get funded. And that's even at the early stages now, unfortunately. I even have angel groups. I mean, I've literally in the last 3 months, have had 7 or 8 deal feedbacks that go like this. Oh, we love you. We love the technology. This is awesome. Come back to us when you've got, and there's always some type of customer traction nugget in there that the startup hasn't hit and even like months later still hasn't hit. So take the sales and biz dev extremely seriously when you're doing a spin out or you're doing your own startup. Let's see. The other question, we're out of time. Last question quickly. What investors think about university owned IP?
Can I take
Uh,
that, Scott?
you
Yeah.
go, you go, you go
Yeah.
ahead.
Your startup needs to have complete and unfettered ownership of the IP. Period. That's what I'm investing in. Now, if somebody else has a finger hold on it, then it's not your startup. So get free, unrestricted access to the IP. That may mean an exclusive license to you, but there shouldn't be anything that muddies the water of who owns this IP, because on an exit, that's what's getting valued.
Oh,
Great.
thank you.
All right.
We're running out of
Perfect.
time.
Yeah,
Thank
we're out
you.
of time,
Thank
but
you.
thanks.
Thank you very much, to Chomet and Scott and Eileen. My name is Francisca Reyes. It's not Scott Brofsky, as it says right there. But before we leave, let me thank you for all your time and for your questions and your interest on joining the Office of Technology Partnerships. As you know, the Office of Technology Partnerships has many programs that provide faculty, staff, and students and local innovators resources and support in your entrepreneurial journey. So we are here to support you. As you know, Chomet and Scott provide a lot of insight and guidance for venture capital, but also we have a group of mentors and entrepreneurs in residence that can provide a lot of guidance and support in your journey. So it doesn't really matter where you are in your stage. Please contact us and we can probably find the best program for you and the ones and resources that can best fit in your idea. Okay, with that said, Eileen, I don't know if you have any other instructions for us to conclude this session.
Oh, I have one more thing. I would just thanks Scott. Scott number 2. I think I think that one other thing is if you're interested or if you have any colleagues or other founders or entrepreneurs in your network that want to learn more about different topics, send us feedback because we can do more of these. We can dive deep into other topics. We've done it before in other years, and let us know what you want to hear about, and we'll do more of these if they're wanted by the community. And again, thanks for attending. Eileen, anything else?
Yes, thanks everyone for attending. So when you guys have registered for the Zoom, I have your email address and I'll be sending you a few resources that we went over today, such as the term sheet, glossary of definitions, and a cap sheet, as well as some information on tech partnerships and the support that we offer to entrepreneurs like you. So if you have any questions, you can send me an email. I will actually, you guys will get it in the email and follow up, but I will include it in the chat right now, just in case. So if you have any other further questions, we'll be possibly sending out a survey to see if you guys want to hear any more webinars based on stuff like this. So that is it for today. And thank you very much to Shomit, Scott, and Francisca Reyes. And we will see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.